A poor girl sees a young billionaire stepping out of a car and shouts, "Daddy, you came back for me." He responds in shock, "I can't be a father. I'm infertile." But when he looks at the girl's mother, he turns pale and starts to cry. The grey sky seemed to match Ethan Carter's mood that morning. He disliked leaving the comfort of his corporate tower, and even more so to visit a working-class neighborhood where buildings rarely exceeded 5 floors. But business was business, and the opportunity to buy that land was too good to ignore. His driver opened the door of the black Bentley. Ethan straightened his Italian silk tie, checked the time on his Swiss watch, and stepped out of the car with the impeccable posture he always maintained. The street was quiet for a weekday. Some people hurried by, others looked curiously at the luxury car parked amid such a simple setting. "Wait here," he ordered the driver. "I shouldn't take more than an hour." The building he intended to inspect was only a few yards away. Its facade was worn and would need to be completely demolished. Nothing his money couldn't solve. In less than a year, he would erect a modern complex there that would enhance the entire area. That was what he did best, turning forgotten places into profitable investments. As he walked along the uneven sidewalk, Ethan checked his phone messages. A reminder of a 3 o'clock meeting. An email from the board of directors. Nothing requiring immediate attention. He was so focused on the screen that he didn't notice the small tornado of energy coming toward him. "Daddy! Daddy!" The child's voice cut through the air like unexpected thunder. Ethan looked up, confused. A small child was running toward him, arms spread wide and a huge smile lighting up her face. "Daddy, you came back for me." For a moment, Ethan was paralyzed. Who was this child? Why was she calling him Daddy? Was it some sort of joke? But before he could react or step away, the girl was already too close. Her brown eyes locked on his with pure, unfiltered joy. And then, something strange happened. Those eyes. Ethan knew those eyes. The almond shape. The specific shade of brown with tiny golden flecks around the iris. It was like looking into a distant mirror in time. I think you're mistaken, little one," he managed to say, his voice rougher than he intended. The girl tilted her head to the side, confused. Her dark hair fell in small curls over her shoulders. She wore a simple but clean dress. She continued gazing at him as if he were the most important person in the world. It was at that moment that Ethan sensed a presence behind the child. He looked up, and time seemed to freeze. Rachel Moore. Of all the people in the world, she was the last person he expected to see, and perhaps the only one who still appeared in his rare dreams. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face a bit more mature, but it was undeniably her. The woman he once loved, the woman he'd left behind when he moved to another country, convinced he couldn't give her what she wanted most. A family. Rachel's eyes met his. There was no anger there. No joy either. Just a kind of weary resignation that hurt more than any accusation ever could. "Emily," she called firmly, "come here." Emily. So that was the child's name. Ethan felt something odd in his chest, as though a knot were forming inside him. "But Mommy, he's Daddy," the girl protested, pointing at Ethan with absolute conviction. Rachel didn't respond. She took 2 steps forward, gently took her daughter's hand, and drew her close. Her gaze crossed Ethan's for only a second, but it was long enough for him to sense the chasm between them. Without a word, Rachel turned and began to walk away, leading the child by the hand. The little girl looked back, confused, still waving at Ethan with her free hand. Ethan stood there, motionless on the sidewalk. His phone vibrated in his hand, but he couldn't look at it. His mind spun in turmoil. 7 years had passed since he'd left Rachel. 7 years since he heard the diagnosis that convinced him he could never be a father. 7 years trying to forget the only woman who had ever truly mattered. And now this. A child with his eyes, with Rachel's smile, calling him Daddy. He watched the 2 figures moving away down the street, until they turned the corner and vanished from sight. He felt his heart pounding hard against his chest, stronger than it had in a long time. The expensive watch on his wrist kept counting the seconds. The business meeting awaited him. The empire he had built needed him. But for the first time in years, None of that seemed to matter. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" The realtor's voice pulled him back to reality. The middle-aged man stood a few steps away, holding a folder and observing him with a curious expression. "Yes, of course," Ethan replied automatically, straightening his posture. "Just an unexpected setback." "I see. We can reschedule if you prefer." Ethan hesitated. His businessman instinct told him to proceed with the visit. It was an important investment. But another voice, one he hadn't heard in a long time, whispered that something far more valuable was at stake. "Actually, I'll have to cancel. Something personal has come up." The realtor looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Carter, we can set another time whenever it's convenient." Ethan thanked him briefly and returned to the car. Sitting in the back seat of the Bentley, he didn't immediately give any orders to the driver. For the first time in years, he had no idea what his next step should be. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked after a few minutes of silence. Ethan kept looking out the window in the direction where Rachel and the girl had disappeared. The strange feeling in his chest hadn't subsided. On the contrary, it seemed to grow with each passing moment. "Home," he finally said. "I need to think." As the car glided through the city streets, Ethan tried to organize his thoughts. It was impossible. He had done all the tests, consulted the best specialists, received the verdict that changed his life. He would never be able to have children. That was why he left Rachel. That was why he buried the dream of having a family. That was why he devoted himself entirely to business, building a solitary empire. But that little girl, those eyes were his. That smile had a trace of Rachel. And the way she called him Daddy, with such certainty, as if she recognized him from somewhere. Ethan closed his eyes. The well-organized, controlled world he had built over the years seemed to be collapsing because of a single encounter, a single look, a single word. "Daddy." Something had changed in that instant, and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. 3 days had passed since his encounter with Rachel and little Emily, 3 days in which Ethan had barely slept. The image of the girl calling him Daddy played in his mind like a movie on repeat. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that little face looking at him with such certainty, such hope, and each time it happened, he felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. On the morning of the 4th day, he decided he could no longer live with that doubt. He picked up the phone and called Elias Montenegro, a private investigator recommended by one of his lawyers. It wasn't the type of resource he usually resorted to, but the circumstances were extraordinary. "Mr. Carter, how can I help you?" The grave, professional voice sounded on the other end of the line. Ethan took a deep breath before answering. "I need information about someone. It's a personal and extremely delicate matter." "I understand. What kind of information do you need?" "A woman named Rachel Moore. I need her current address, occupation, financial situation, and about her daughter, Emily, date of birth, school, routine." Ethan tried to keep his voice steady, as though discussing a routine business matter. "Any specific reason for this investigation, sir?" There was a cautious tone in Montenegro's voice. Ethan hesitated for a moment. Even in his private office, the walls seemed to have ears. "It's better if we talk in person." 2 hours later, Ethan was receiving Elias in his office. The middle-aged man had a common appearance, well-trimmed grey hair, a discreet grey suit, the kind of person who goes unnoticed anywhere, exactly what you'd expect from a good investigator. "This woman, Rachel Moore," Ethan began, choosing his words carefully as he looked out the window of his top-floor suite. "We were in a serious, intense relationship 7 years ago. We broke up when I moved to the United States." He paused, turning to face the investigator. "Recently, I ran into her and a child who called me Daddy." Elias nodded without showing surprise. He had probably heard similar stories 100 times. "And you want to verify if the child could be your biological daughter?" "Yes, but there's a complication." Ethan sat in his leather chair, adjusting his tie unconsciously. "At the time, I was diagnosed as infertile. I consulted the best specialists. They ran tests, repeated them, confirmed them. The verdict was unanimous. I see. Medical diagnoses can be wrong. Elias's voice was neutral, professional. That's exactly what I thought. The problem is, that's why I ended things with Rachel. She wanted a family, children. I couldn't give that to her. It was the hardest decision of my life. Ethan wasn't used to opening up like that, but he needed the investigator to understand the gravity of the situation. And now there's a little girl who looks like you. She has my eyes, my chin. It's unmistakable. I need to find out the truth, without fanfare, with total discretion. That may involve unconventional methods, Elias warned, his gaze direct and unflinching. Just do what's necessary, and keep it discreet. Rachel mustn't know she's being investigated. The following days went by in torturous slowness. Ethan tried to focus on business, on meetings, contracts, and mergers, but his mind kept returning to the same question. Could it be possible? Could the doctors have been that wrong? And if Emily really was his daughter, what would he do? A week later, Elias knocked on his office door. Ethan received him at once, even dismissing his secretary. I found what I needed, Mr. Carter. The investigator placed a folder on the table. It wasn't easy. Miss Umar is quite private. She leads a discreet life with a stable routine. Ethan opened the folder with restrained anxiety. Inside were detailed reports about Rachel's life over the past 7 years. Bank statements, medical records, documents from Emily's school, photos taken from a distance. Rachel Moore, 35 years old. Current address, 47 Elm Street, apartment 3B. Employed as a cleaner in 3 different places, a tech company in the morning, a law office on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons, and a hospital on Saturdays. Financial situation stable, though modest. No significant debts, but also no luxuries or extravagances. Emily Moore, 6 years old. Born on August 15th, exactly 7 months after Ethan left for the United States. Attends Westfield Primary School, where she maintains above-average grades, participates in the children's choir, and takes art classes on Saturdays. There was no father's name on the birth certificate. The medical reports showed that Rachel had a difficult pregnancy. She worked until her 8th month to save money, gave birth alone, with only the support of a friend named Diane Fletcher. For the first few years, she juggled 3 different jobs to cover expenses, while Diane often helped take care of the baby. The last page contained a recent photograph, Rachel and Emily in a park, the girl smiling while eating ice cream. The resemblance to Ethan was so clear it hurt. The same shape of the eyes, the same determined chin, even the way she smiled had something familiar. "What else did you find out?" he asked, still looking at the photo, unable to look away. "The girl has excellent grades in school. Her teachers describe her as bright and determined, very creative in art class. The mother is respected by her neighbors, works hard, pays her bills on time." Elias paused. "Neighbors say they've never seen any man visiting the apartment. Ms. Moore seems to have dedicated herself entirely to raising her daughter." Ethan closed the folder slowly, his mind processing all that information. "That's enough, thank you. Do you plan to contact them?" "Yes, but I need to do it in person." When the investigator left, Ethan remained seated in silence for a long time. The pieces of the puzzle lay before him on the desk. Emily had been born exactly during the period that would confirm she was his daughter. Rachel had never married, never introduced any man as the girl's father, and the physical resemblance was undeniable. He spent the next few days thinking about how to approach the situation, send a letter, call. Showing up unannounced seemed invasive, but any prior contact would give Rachel the chance to avoid him, as she had before. On Saturday, he made his decision. He put on casual clothes, jeans, and a simple blue shirt, nothing reminiscent of the impeccable executive he usually was. He drove his own car, not the Bentley with a chauffeur. He parked in front of the modest building on Elm Street and stayed there a few minutes, summoning courage. The building was simple, but well maintained. There were potted plants in the windows and children's bicycles locked to the entrance gate. A typical place where typical people lived their lives. A place he would never have imagined finding someone from his past. Finally, He left the car and walked up to the third floor. He stopped in front of door 3B, his heart pounding in a way it never had before any major meeting or multi-million-dollar negotiation. This was different. This was personal. He rang the doorbell and waited, tense. Seconds later, the door opened. Rachel stood there, wearing sweatpants and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, as if she had been cleaning. Upon seeing him, her expression changed from surprise to shock, then to anger. Without a word, she tried to close the door immediately. "Wait, Rachel." Ethan held the door firmly, but not aggressively. "I just want to talk. How did you find out where I live?" Her eyes narrowed in distrust, her voice low and tense. "Does it matter? Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Rachel hesitated, her eyes scanning him with distrust. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she opened the door just enough for him to enter. The apartment was small, but cozy and well-organized. A modest living room with a 2-seater sofa, a dining table with 4 chairs, and a small open-plan kitchen. Colorful toys were neatly stored in a decorated box. Children's drawings adorned the fridge. Butterflies, flowers, a house with 3 people holding hands. "Emily's playing in the neighbor's apartment," Rachel said, crossing her arms defensively. She did not offer him a seat. "What do you want, Ethan?" He took a deep breath, deciding to be direct. "I hired an investigator." Her face immediately hardened. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with anger. "You did what?" "I had to know, Rachel. I needed to understand how this was possible. You invaded my privacy, spied on me, on my daughter." Her voice trembled, a mix of outrage and disbelief. "What right do you think you have? I know it sounds terrible, and maybe it is, but I was desperate." Ethan took a step forward. "Since that day when I saw her for the first time, when she called me Daddy, I haven't been able to think of anything else. So you decided to investigate us like we were, what, suspects in some crime?" Rachel shook her head. "Typical. You always needed proof. Even when I said I loved you, you looked for signs, confirmations. Now you come back wanting to piece together a puzzle. I'm not a riddle, Ethan. I'm a woman who raised a daughter on my own." Ethan felt the weight of her words. She was right. He had always been analytical, calculating, needing evidence for every decision, every feeling. "Rachel, look at her, look at me. This resemblance, I need to know the truth." Rachel averted her gaze, her arms still crossed like a physical barrier between them. The truth is you left. The truth is I stayed. That's all that matters now." "But Emily was born 7 months after I left. How is that possible, Rachel? The doctors said I was infertile. They did all those tests. And you believed them, not me." Her voice was more bitter than Ethan had ever heard. "What does that mean?" Rachel didn't answer. She turned toward the window, looking outside as though searching for words she didn't want to say, or perhaps the courage to say them. "Rachel, please, I need to know." "Need to? Why? What will change now?" She turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "What do you plan to do with that information, Ethan?" "I don't know. I really don't, but it could change everything." Rachel let out a humorless laugh. "Now, after 6 years, you think you can just show up and what?" "I'm not making demands, Rachel. I just want to understand. What do you want, Ethan? Come back into her life, into my life, after all these years. I want the truth, that's all. For now, that's all." "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "You think you deserve the truth. You left. I was the one who stayed. That's all that matters now." "I didn't know you were pregnant, Rachel. If I had known—" He let the sentence trail off, unsure what he really would have done. "What? You would have stayed? Come back?" "I don't believe that. You were so set on leaving. You had it all planned out. And when you thought you couldn't give me what I wanted, it was the perfect excuse, wasn't it?" Her words hit him like a punch. There was a painful truth in them that he wasn't prepared to confront. Ethan sat on the sofa, exhausted, running his hands over his face. "I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. But at least I would have had the chance to choose. You had that right too to tell me." Rachel remained standing, distant. Some choices can't be undone, Ethan. You chose to leave. I chose to stay and raise my daughter. Our daughter? He looked up, seeking confirmation in her eyes. She didn't answer. The silence itself was an answer. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rachel glanced at the clock, surprised. Already, she murmured, going to the door. When she opened it, Emily ran in excitedly, talking about something she had just done at the neighbor's place. Mommy, look what I made with Mrs. Martinez. She held a small necklace of colored beads in her little hands. She froze upon seeing Ethan in her living room. A smile of recognition lit up her face. Hi. You came to visit us? Rachel and Ethan exchanged quick glances. The tension between them was palpable, but Emily didn't seem to notice, glowing with the presence of the man she somehow knew was important. Emily, sweetheart. Rachel tried to keep her voice calm. Go take your bath now. It's almost dinner time. But I want to talk to him, the girl protested, pointing at Ethan. Later, Emily, bath time now. Emily looked from Rachel to Ethan, finally sensing that something wasn't right. Her smile faded a bit. Are you two fighting? No, sweetheart, Rachel answered too quickly. I'm just talking. Emily still looked unconvinced. She glanced at Ethan with curiosity. Are you leaving again? The innocent question struck Ethan like a blow. Leaving. Again. What had Rachel told her? Emily. Now, Rachel's voice left no room for argument. The girl nodded, reluctantly, and headed toward the bathroom. But before leaving the room, she turned and looked at Ethan. You have eyes just like mine, she said, then walked away. The silence that followed was dense, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan looked at Rachel, seeking answers she clearly wasn't ready to give. Rachel stood firm, her lips pressed together in a thin line. Whatever she knew, she wouldn't reveal it now. Not under pressure, not through investigations, not through confrontations. Ethan realized he was at an impasse, but hearing Emily humming in the bathroom, he knew he wouldn't give up. Not anymore. He needed to find out the truth, and maybe, deep down, to find his own redemption. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Rachel. 2 weeks during which Ethan couldn't get Emily out of his mind for a single minute. Her face appeared in his dreams. Those eyes, his eyes, looking at him with innocence and curiosity. He tried calling Rachel 3 times. The first time, she hung up the moment she recognized his voice. The second time, she let it ring until it went to voicemail. The third time, an automated message informed him the number was no longer receiving calls from that phone. He sent flowers. They were returned. He tried a formal letter, explaining that he only wanted to talk. The letter came back with refused by recipient, stamped on the envelope. Sitting in his office, overlooking the city, Ethan felt powerless for the first time in his life. He had always gotten what he wanted. Deals, properties, agreements. All it took was having a plan and executing it with precision. But now, all his attempts were hitting a wall. Maybe it's better to leave it alone, his lawyer suggested. If you push too hard, she could claim harassment. But Ethan couldn't just let it go, not after seeing Emily, not after hearing her say she had his eyes, not after her innocent question, "Are you leaving again?" One Wednesday afternoon, he made a decision. He left work early, changed out of his suit into casual clothes, and drove to the neighborhood where Rachel and Emily lived, not to knock on the door again, but just to be near them. To better understand the world his possible daughter was growing up in, he parked a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. He walked the narrow streets, watching the simple houses, the children playing on the sidewalks, the small shops. It was a world so different from his own, his penthouse and luxury cars, yet there was something genuine here, something real that his polished, perfect world lacked. Rounding a corner, he spotted a small playground. It was just a patch of packed dirt with some worn equipment, 2 swings, a slide, a broken seesaw, and there, crouched alone on the ground, was Emily. Ethan stopped, unsure. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want to anger Rachel further. But at the same time, he felt irresistibly drawn to that child who was intently drawing with colored chalk on the cracked concrete. He approached slowly, trying not to startle her. When he was only a few feet away, Emily looked up and saw him. For an instant, Ethan feared she would yell or run away, but instead, a smile lit up her face. "Hi, Emily," he said softly, almost in a whisper. Her smile wavered a bit, as if remembering something. "You came again, but Mommy got really mad that day. She said she doesn't want you near us, that she was very, very upset." Ethan felt the weight of those words. He crouched down to her level, carefully keeping a respectful distance. His eyes were misty, but he tried to smile. "I understand, and she has every right to be upset, but are you okay?" Emily nodded, her dark curls bouncing with the movement. Then she pointed to the drawing she was making on the ground. "It's a house with 3 windows. One is me, another is Mommy. The other—" She hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Could be you, if she lets you." Ethan felt his heart tighten. The simplicity with which Emily saw the world, the ease with which she included him in her drawing, in her life, was overwhelming. "It's a very beautiful drawing," he managed, trying to keep the emotion out of his voice. Emily tilted her head, observing him curiously. "Why does Mommy get sad when she talks about you?" The question caught Ethan by surprise. I think I hurt your mom a long time ago." "Are you my real dad?" Emily asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on his. Ethan swallowed hard. "Why do you think that?" "Because I saw Mommy looking at a picture of you, the one she keeps in her little box. She was crying and holding the photo. When I asked who it was, she said it was my dad, but that you went away. Then when I saw you in the street that day, I recognized you from the photo." Ethan felt as if the air had been punched out of his lungs. Rachel still had a photo of him. She cried looking at it, and she had told Emily he was her father. "Emily?" An older woman's voice called from across the playground. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Ethan realized it was time to leave. He didn't want to cause more problems. He got up quickly. "It was good to see you. Tell your mum I just wanted to check if you two are okay, and that—" He hesitated. "She can call me when she's ready to talk." Emily nodded, turning back to her drawing, adding more details to the house with 3 windows. Ethan walked away, heading back to his car parked far away. As he walked, he felt something different in his chest. The pain was still there, the uncertainty too, but there was something new now, a small spark of hope. Emily had included him in her drawing. A window in her house could be his, if Mommy lets you. It was a start, a small opening. For the first time since he saw that child running toward him, calling him Daddy, Ethan felt that maybe, somehow, things could be worked out. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick. But that chalk-drawn window represented a possibility of redemption. The night after meeting Emily at the playground was restless for Ethan. He tossed and turned in his luxurious penthouse bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets tangling around his legs as his mind spun endlessly. The girl's words echoed, a photo of him kept by Rachel, tears in her eyes as she looked at it, Emily recognizing him as her father because of that very picture. The truth seemed increasingly clear, yet still so distant, like an island on the horizon that you can't quite reach. When the first rays of sunlight slipped through his automated blinds, Ethan was already up. He'd made a decision. He wouldn't force a meeting with Rachel. That would only make things worse, driving her further away. But he wanted to see Emily again. He needed to build some sort of connection. Even if it was just drawing with chalk on worn concrete in a playground he never would have visited in his old life. While his breakfast went cold, untouched on the marble kitchen counter, he called his assistant. "I need you to cancel all my meetings today." "Mr. Carter, the meeting with the Chinese investors has been scheduled for months, and the quarterly conference with the board—" "Cancel everything," he interrupted, with a firmness that left no room for discussion. "I have a personal emergency." On the other end, the assistant hesitated, probably trying to recall if Ethan Carter had ever put any personal matter above business. Never, in all the years she'd worked for him. "As you wish, sir. Should I reschedule for tomorrow?" "I'm not sure when I'll be available. Just let them know I'll get in touch." After hanging up, Ethan looked at his wardrobe full of Italian suits and custom-made shirts. None of that would do. He didn't want to intimidate Emily. He didn't want to look like the cold, distant executive everyone knew. He found a pair of jeans he rarely wore and a simple grey t-shirt at the back of the closet. He finished the look with sneakers he kept for his occasional visits to the building's gym. Staring at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man who stared back. He looked younger, less severe. He looked like someone who could be the father of a little girl. He drove his own car, a discreet BMW he kept for personal errands, to Rachel's neighborhood. He parked in the same inconspicuous spot as the day before and walked to the playground, feeling as nervous as he'd ever been. Not even in the most important negotiations of his career had he felt this wave of anxiety, this sense that something crucial was on the line. He sat on the worn wooden bench whose warped slats had seen years of use. He watched the simple life around him. Mothers pushing strollers, elderly people walking slowly with canes, children running and shouting with the freedom only they possess. The hours dragged on. The sun rose high and began its slow descent. Ethan checked his watch repeatedly, wondering if he was being foolish, if Emily would even show up, if he should just give up and return to his world of spreadsheets and conference calls. And then, in mid-afternoon, as the golden light bathed the park with an almost ethereal quality, she appeared. Emily walked alone along the stone path leading to the swings. She carried a small pink backpack, a bit worn at the edges. Her hair was tied in a slightly crooked ponytail, as though she had tried to fix it herself. She wore a light blue dress, somewhat faded from many washes, but clean and neatly pressed. When she saw him, his eyes lit up with recognition. Lit up. A smile began to form, but it was tinged with shyness, a caution no child should need. She approached slowly, as if testing the space between them. "You really came back," she said, sounding genuinely surprised, as if she hadn't believed he would keep his promise. Ethan felt warmth flood his chest at that simple statement. It was so little she expected of him. "I said I would." She nodded, as though it made perfect sense, as if his words held weight and value even though he had never proven himself worthy of that trust. Without any further explanation or questions, she sat down on the concrete, opened her backpack, and took out some pieces of colored chalk, already worn from use. She started drawing, focused, as if Ethan weren't there. He stayed on the bench, watching her in silence. He didn't want to push. He didn't know how to act or what to say. He had never spent time with children. His own childhood had been so regimented, so controlled by his father's rigid schedules, that he barely remembered what it was like to be a kid. Had he ever sat like this, carefree, drawing on concrete? After a few minutes, without looking up from the sketch taking shape beneath her small fingers, Emily spoke. "Mommy's still mad, but yesterday she didn't cry. She just stayed quiet. I think she doesn't know whether to believe you." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. The image of Rachel suffering because of him was almost unbearable. The woman he once loved, crying alone because of choices he had made. "She has every right," he said sincerely. "I hurt you both. I left when I should have stayed." Emily finally raised her face. There was a seriousness in her eyes, his eyes that seemed far beyond her age, a wisdom children gain only when they grow up too fast, when they see things they shouldn't. "Are you going to leave again?" The simple question carried enormous weight. Ethan felt his throat tighten, as if someone were pressing directly on his Adam's apple. "No, never again," he said, mustering all the conviction he could, surprising even himself with the certainty he felt. "Even if your mom doesn't want to see me, I'll be around, because now I know how badly I messed up. And because—" he hesitated, searching for the right words to explain something he didn't fully understand. "You matter to me." A small smile curled Emily's lips. It wasn't the wide, carefree grin of before. It was more contained, more cautious. A smile that showed she was starting to believe, but was still afraid. "Do you want to draw with me?" she offered, holding out a worn piece of blue chalk. "Just until Mommy gets here." Ethan felt something crumble inside him. A barrier, a wall he hadn't even known existed, collapsing like it was made of the same brittle material as the chalk in his hand. He stood up from the bench and knelt beside her on the hard concrete, ignoring the fact that his jeans, likely more expensive than her entire wardrobe, were getting dirty. "I'd love to," he said, taking the chalk. Emily had already begun a drawing, a house much like the one from the day before, with 3 windows and a red door in the center. Ethan started sketching beside it, drawing a large tree with branches stretching upward like fingers reaching for the sky. "It's an oak," he explained. "When I was a kid, there was one like it in my backyard." "Did you play in it?" Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Not much. My father didn't allow it. He said I could get hurt, and that trees weren't meant for playing." He remembered his father's severe, distant face. Emily frowned, genuinely puzzled by the idea. "But trees are the best for playing. At my school, we climb one during recess all the time. Then your dad was different from mine. That's a good thing." Ethan tasted bitterness as he spoke. His father had always been distant, always prioritizing business over fun, profit over laughter. Emily drew a flower beside Ethan's tree, a daisy in bright yellow and orange, larger than the tree itself, an impossible proportion that only exists in children's drawings. Then she added another, and another. Soon, there was a small garden of colorful flowers around the oak. "These flowers are magic," she explained seriously, as if sharing an important secret. "They protect the tree when there's a storm." Ethan smiled, feeling a tenderness he had never experienced before. "And this house, who lives in it?" Emily looked at her drawing, pensive. "A family, the mom, the daughter, and—" She paused, studying Ethan's face. "Someone else." "Who?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. Emily shrugged, suddenly shy. "I'm still deciding. I'm waiting to see." They continued drawing in silence for a while. Ethan added clouds to the sky, trying to recall how he used to draw as a child. Emily completed the scene with a dog in the yard, an animal that looked more like a horse with a long tail, but which she proudly identified as a Labrador. "Do you have a dog?" Ethan asked. She shook her head. "They're not allowed in our apartment, but I'd love to have one." "What would you name it if you had one?" "Rex," she replied without hesitation. "Like the one in that movie Mommy showed me, the police dog." Ethan grinned. "That's a good name for a dog." They spent the next hour drawing and chatting. With each passing minute, Ethan discovered something new about Emily. Pieces of the puzzle that was his daughter. He learned she liked strawberry ice cream, but only if it had real fruit pieces in it. That her favorite subject at school was art, closely followed by science. That she dreamed of being an astronaut or a veterinarian when she grew up, or maybe both. "A space vet who looks after astronaut dogs," she explained, with all the logic of a child. He found out she was scared of thunder and disliked broccoli, but ate it anyway because, "Mommy says it makes me grow strong." She told him about her best friend Lily, who collected butterflies, plastic ones, not real, and about her music teacher, who thought she had a good ear. Tiny details, fragments of a life he knew nothing about, yet now they seemed more precious than any contract he'd ever signed or deal he'd ever closed. As the daylight waned, Emily packed up the colored chalk in her backpack. The concrete in front of them had become a burst of color and shapes, a window into a world where trees could be blue and flowers could be taller than houses. "I have to go. Mommy will be worried," she said, standing up and dusting off her dress. "Of course," Ethan agreed, standing and brushing off his jeans. "Can I come back tomorrow to draw a little more?" Emily nodded, smiling more openly now. "I'll come after school, around 3. "I'll be here," he promised. This time, there was no doubt in his voice. They said goodbye with a wave, and Ethan watched as Emily ran until she disappeared from view, the small silhouette fading into the sunset. Only then did he notice a strand of dark, curly hair clinging to his pant leg, left behind when Emily had hugged him briefly. He picked it up carefully between his fingers, examining it against the light. The doubt he tried to ignore still pulsed in the back of his mind, like a sore tooth you can't help but probe with your tongue. Was she truly his biological daughter? The doctors had been so adamant about his infertility. 3 different specialists in 3 different countries couldn't all be wrong, could they? He looked at the tiny strand of hair once more. So small, so insignificant, yet it might contain the answer to the question that would change his life forever. The next morning, he carefully placed the strand in an envelope and drove to a private genetics clinic on the other side of the city. It was a discreet building with no flashy signs, frequented by people who could pay a premium for privacy. He paid a considerable sum for the test to be done with the utmost urgency and no questions asked. He also provided a sample of his own, a swab with cells from the inside of his cheek. "Results will be ready in 48 hours, the receptionist said with professional efficiency, showing no curiosity as to why a clearly wealthy man would request a discreet paternity test. "I'll await your call," Ethan replied, handing her a card with his personal number. Leaving the clinic, he felt a confused mix of emotions. Part of him wanted a definitive answer, whatever it might be. Another part feared the test would show Emily wasn't his biological daughter, that all of this was just a cruel coincidence. What if the resemblance of the eyes, the chin, were illusions conjured by a mind desperate for connection? But there was another question too, one he never would have considered a few weeks ago. If the test showed no genetic relation, would it change what he felt? Would it diminish Emily's importance in his life? After all, what defines fatherhood, blood or heart? The next 48 hours would be the longest of his life, and no matter the result, Ethan knew nothing would ever be the same again. On that worn concrete playground, between chalk drawings and innocent conversations, something had begun to grow, something no DNA test could measure or explain. Rachel stayed up all night, thinking. The decision wasn't easy. For 6 years, she had carefully kept her life in order, protecting Emily from disappointments, from broken promises, from false hopes. For 6 years, she had been both mother and father, juggling 3 jobs, paying bills, soothing fevers, banishing nightmares. And now he was back. Emily talked about him every day, about the man in the park who drew blue trees, about the doll named Isadora with the floral dress, about his eyes, just like mine, Mommy. She could no longer hide the fact that she had told Emily years ago that her father lived far away, that she had shown photos, that she had kept Ethan's image alive, even when she swore she'd erased him from her heart. When Emily mentioned that Ethan would be at the park again the next day, Rachel made her decision. It was time for the truth. She woke up early, even earlier than usual. She prepared Emily's breakfast with extra care. She left her with Mrs. Martinez, the neighbor who always helped when needed. "I might be back a bit late today," she explained, offering no further details. In her bedroom, she opened her simple wardrobe. What do you wear to confront the past? Nothing too fancy. She didn't want to look like she was trying to impress him, nothing too careless. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of thinking she'd fallen apart without him. She chose a light blue blouse and dark jeans, simple yet dignified. She combed her hair and pulled it into a low bun, no makeup. In the mirror, she saw a woman she hadn't known 6 years ago, stronger, more tired too. A woman who had learned to survive disappointments, to build something out of nothing, to always put someone else first. She was ready. The trip to the city's financial center was long, 2 buses, then some walking. She knew the route well. She had traveled it hundreds of times before, when she worked as a cleaner in the glass and steel skyscraper that housed Ethan's corporate headquarters. That was where they'd met. One night when she was cleaning his office while he worked late. The building hadn't changed, imposing, cold, its hundreds of windows reflecting the morning sun. Rachel stopped on the sidewalk, watching the people entering and leaving, hurried executives, elegant assistants, frantic messengers, a world that had never been hers. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold morning air. She lifted her chin, straightened her shoulders, and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was exactly as she remembered. Polished marble, a central fountain, minimalist and expensive furnishings. So much money wasted just to impress, she thought, recalling how many times Emily had to wear shoes with glued soles because there wasn't enough money for new ones. She approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly straightened hair looked her up and down, barely disguising her surprise at seeing someone so unassuming in such a place. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, polite but cold. "I'd like to speak to Ethan Carter," Rachel said, keeping her voice firm. "Mr. Carter is very busy today. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm sure he'll see me." Rachel held the receptionist's gaze, not wavering. "Tell him Rachel Moore is here. He'll understand." The young woman hesitated, clearly uneasy with the request. It wasn't every day someone without an appointment asked to see the company president, especially someone dressed as simply as Rachel. "One moment, please." Rachel waited, standing, refusing to sit on one of the leather sofas. She watched the hustle of people, all so busy, so wrapped up in their small world of papers and meetings. How many of these people had children? How many truly knew their children? 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Ethan appeared. He wore a dark, impeccable suit, a white shirt, a blue tie. His hair was perfectly trimmed, his posture erect, the businessman the world knew. But Rachel saw something else. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he clutched a white envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. There was a logo on one corner she recognized immediately, the city's most expensive genetics clinic. The moment he saw her, Ethan froze. Fear, hope, and guilt flickered across his face in rapid succession. "Rachel?" His voice was higher-pitched than usual. "We need to talk, Ethan." He glanced around, noticing the curious stares of employees. "Of course. Let's go to my office." Rachel followed him to the elevator. They rode in silence up to the top floor. The white envelope trembled slightly in his hand. They stepped into a wide corridor with a secretary who looked surprised to see Rachel. Ethan gave a brief nod. "No interruptions, please." His office was enormous. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city. A dark wooden desk, leather sofas, artworks on the walls. Every detail screamed power, money, status. "May I come in? I didn't come to fight. I came to tell the truth." He motioned for her to enter. He closed the door. Rachel took a few steps inside but didn't sit. She needed to stand for this. "I received this morning," Ethan said, lifting the envelope. "It's the DNA test I ordered." Rachel felt her blood run cold. So that was it. He had collected a sample from Emily, without permission, without asking. Typical. "And you didn't have the courage to open it," she observed. "No." He looked almost ashamed. "Because I realized that no matter what it says, I've already decided I want to be part of her life. Whether she's my biological daughter or not, I already care about her." Rachel hadn't expected that. She'd expected arrogance, demands, perhaps even legal threats. Not this almost timid confession. "But you do want to know," she said. "You've always needed proof, certainty." Ethan didn't deny it. He looked at the envelope in his hands. Rachel took a deep breath. It was time. "You left thinking it was the right thing. You said you were infertile and you disappeared, but you weren't. I found out I was pregnant shortly after you left. I figured you'd never believe me, that you'd think I was trying to trap you. So I raised Emily on my own." Ethan's eyes widened. When did you find out?" 3 weeks after you left. I called you twice. The first time you didn't answer. The second time your secretary said you were too busy to take my call. I didn't know. Rachel, I swear I didn't know you called. Would it have made a difference if you had known?" The question hung in the air, heavy. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the envelope in his hands. Slowly, he began to open it. The paper tore softly. He removed the contents. Several printed sheets containing technical terms and graphs. Rachel watched as his eyes moved over the text, seeking the line that really mattered. She saw the exact moment he found it, the sudden stiffness in his shoulders, the change in his breathing, the slight tremor in his lower lip. "She is my daughter." It wasn't a question. It was a breath of recognition, wonder, terror. 99.9% compatibility. She always was, even when you didn't know. Ethan lifted his gaze from the paper, and Rachel saw something she'd never seen before. Real tears forming. All those doctors, all those tests, they were all wrong. Or maybe, Rachel suggested softly, something changed. Miracles happen, Ethan. He shook his head in amazement. After a moment, he spoke, voice strained. "Rachel, let me be part of her life. I don't want to run anymore. She felt a tumult of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally out. Fear of what it would mean for Emily. Anger for all those years he was absent. Hope for a different future. It's not that simple, Ethan. You can't just show up after 6 years and claim a place in her life. That's not how it works. I know. He sounded sincerely humble. I'm not demanding anything. I'm asking for a chance to know her, to be part of her life, in whatever way you allow. Rachel studied him carefully. The man before her wasn't the same one she'd known years ago. There was something different in his eyes, a softness that had never been there before. Then prove it, she said at last, because now it's not about you. It's about Emily. What do you want me to do? He looked genuinely lost, like a man who'd always known all the answers suddenly facing a problem money and power couldn't fix. Start by being present, not just when it's convenient, not just when you have time between meetings. Be consistent. Don't make promises you can't keep. She's had enough disappointments. Ethan nodded slowly. I can do that. I want to do that. And understand there will be rules, boundaries. You can't just barge into her life and change everything. She has a routine, friends, a life we built. I understand. And, Rachel hesitated, don't use her as a project to feel better about yourself. She's not your redemption, Ethan. She's a person. A silence settled between them. It wasn't hostile, but it was filled with unspoken truths, regrets, possibilities. Both knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be tough days ahead. They'd have to learn how to coexist, no longer as lovers but as parents. Thank you, Ethan finally said, for raising such an amazing little person, for being strong when I was weak. Rachel nodded, allowing herself a small smile. She really is amazing, isn't she? She has your eyes, Ethan observed gently. Not mine. The shape, the color, yes. But the brightness, the kindness, that's yours. For a moment, Rachel saw the man she'd once fallen in love with, hidden beneath layers of success and responsibility. Can I see her today? He asked, his voice almost timid. No, Rachel replied, firm but not unkind. I need to prepare Emily first. Talk to her, explain what's happening. But maybe this weekend, the three of us can meet at the park. Ethan nodded, accepting her terms without argument. At the park, Saturday. Rachel turned to leave, feeling lighter than when she had arrived. At the door, she looked back. Ethan? Yes. The truth isn't always easy, but it sets you free, in many ways. He smiled. A real smile. Not the polite executive one. See you on Saturday, Rachel. See you Saturday. She walked out of his office with her head held high, passing the astonished secretary, down the wide corridor, and into the silent elevator. Stepping out onto the street, she looked up at the sky. It seemed bluer than she remembered. The future was uncertain. She didn't know what it would be like to share Emily, how Ethan would adapt to fatherhood, how the three of them would find a new balance. But for the first time in 6 years, she felt maybe, just maybe, things could work out. The truth had been spoken. The rest only time would tell. Saturday dawned under a clear sky, an almost unreal shade of blue that felt like a good omen. Ethan woke too early, as nervous as a teenager before a first date. He changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on something casual. Jeans, a light blue shirt, and a thin sweater. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or power. On the way to the park, he stopped at a florist. He bought a small bouquet for Rachel, simple daisies, the same ones Emily had drawn around the blue tree with chalk. For the girl, he chose a children's book about an astronaut traveling through space with her dog. He remembered how she had talked about becoming a space vet and smiled. He arrived half an hour earlier than agreed. He sat on the now familiar bench, watching other families in the park, parents pushing swings, mothers helping toddlers up the slide, vigilant grandparents on the sidelines, a world that had never been his, but one that now called to him with a promise of belonging. He saw them arrive, hand in hand. Emily wore a yellow dress with small embroidered flowers and had her hair in 2 braids. Rachel looked simple but lovely, in jeans and a white blouse. They both seemed nervous, yet determined. When Emily saw him, she paused a moment, glancing at her mother as if asking for confirmation. Rachel nodded softly, whispering something in her ear. The girl let go of her mother's hand and ran toward him. "You really came," she exclaimed, stopping a few steps away, suddenly shy. "I promised, didn't I?" Ethan answered, crouching to her level. "And promises are important." Rachel approached more slowly, keeping a neutral expression that masked the turmoil inside her. Ethan stood up and handed her the small bouquet. "Thank you," she said, accepting the flowers with a restrained smile. "That was thoughtful." "I have something for you too," Ethan told Emily, offering the wrapped book. The girl's eyes sparkled as she tore off the paper to see the colorful cover. "Look, Mommy, it's a book about space, and there's an astronaut dog." "How neat," Rachel said, exchanging a quick glance with Ethan. "What do you say when you get a present?" "Thank you," Emily said, hugging the book against her chest. Then she looked up at Ethan with those eyes, his eyes, full of questions left unasked. An uncomfortable silence settled among the adults. Emily broke it. "Mommy said you're really my dad," she stated, looking at him with a seriousness surprising for such a small child. "And that you didn't know I existed before." Ethan swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "That's true, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have come back a long time ago." "Why didn't you know?" Her question was direct, unfiltered, typical of children. Rachel interjected gently. "Remember, we talked about this at home. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. The important thing is that we're all here now." Emily nodded, still processing. After a moment, as if making a major decision, she reached out to Ethan. "Let's go to the slide. I want to show you how I can climb to the top by myself." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of colors and emotions. Ethan pushed Emily on the swing, cheered when she went down the tallest slide alone, listened attentively as she explained the solar system while they ate ice cream. Rachel watched from a distance, letting father and daughter build their own moments together, only stepping in occasionally. As the sun began to descend, the three of them sat on a bench, Emily in the middle, flipping through her new book while the adults spoke in cautious, short sentences filled with unspoken meanings. "She's doing well in school," Rachel noted. "I can tell she's very smart," Ethan replied. "She was talking about constellations with impressive detail. She loves science. Her teacher says she has potential." They were superficial conversations, but underneath them ran a deeper current, mutual recognition that they were trying, that there was a genuine effort, despite old wounds. When it was time to leave, Emily closed her book and looked at Ethan with a mix of hope and fear. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Ethan looked to Rachel for permission. She nodded slightly. "If you want me to, I'll come," he answered. "I do," Emily said simply. Then, on impulse, she hugged him, not just a quick wrap of her arms around his legs, but a real hug. Ethan felt something crumble and rebuild inside him. He hugged her back carefully, as if holding something infinitely precious. "Can I call you Daddy?" Emily asked against his chest. "I'd love that," Ethan replied, his voice choking with emotion. When they released each other, Emily went back to Rachel's side. Rachel placed her hand protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "See you tomorrow then," she said to Ethan. As he watched them leave, Ethan understood this was only the beginning. There would be hard days, painful conversations, constant adjustments. There were 6 years to make up for. 6 years of missed birthdays, first steps not witnessed, fevers not tended to. But there was also a future that, for the first time in a long while, felt full of possibilities. Like a blue tree drawn in chalk on concrete, surrounded by magic flowers that protected it from storms. In that moment, under a sky slowly turning dark, Ethan Carter discovered there were things more important than multi-million-dollar contracts or glass skyscrapers. There was a little girl with brown eyes flecked with gold calling him Daddy, and that, he realized, was enough. 3 months had passed since that first official meeting at the park. 3 months of regular visits, shared ice cream, bedtime stories, and small steps toward trust. Ethan faithfully kept every commitment, every promise he made to Emily. Rachel observed cautiously, but with growing hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. It was on a rainy Thursday when the lawyer called. George Reynolds, the man who had handled the Carter family's affairs for decades, sounded older and more tired than Ethan remembered. "We need to clear out your father's office, Mr. Carter. The building is going to be sold next month." The old office of Walter Carter. A place Ethan had rarely stepped into, even when his father was alive. A sanctum of patriarchal power that had always intimidated him, even as an adult, even after building his own empire. "Couldn't someone from the company do that?" Ethan tried. "There are confidential documents, sir, family matters. Your presence is required." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. The next day, he parked in front of the old building in the city's financial district. It was from another era, all granite and dark wood, lacking the glass and steel that defined modern skyscrapers. His father's secretary, the same stern woman who had been at that desk for nearly 30 years, greeted him with a formal nod. "Mr. Carter, the office is just as your father left it. No one has touched anything since the funeral." Ethan thanked her and went into the room alone. The smell of leather, old wood, and the faint aroma of cigars Walter used to smoke still lingered. It was as if the old man could walk in at any moment, frowning and criticizing one of Ethan's business decisions. For hours, he worked methodically, sorting important documents from those he could discard. Most were business-related: old contracts, property deeds, stocks from companies long sold. Occasionally, he stumbled on something personal: a photo from his parents' wedding, a birthday card he himself had made in elementary school, surprisingly filed in a folder labeled "Family." At the bottom of the desk's lowest drawer, behind dusty folders, he found a brown envelope. It had no markings, just a rubber band holding it closed. It looked like it had been deliberately hidden, away from prying eyes. Ethan opened it without much thought, expecting more old business documents. What he saw made his blood run cold. Investigation: Rachel Moore. The pages were yellowed with age, but the content was perfectly legible. Detailed reports on Rachel, photos of her entering and leaving a prenatal clinic, a hospital document confirming Emily Moore's birth, copies of bank statements, even the child's birth certificate, where the father's name was left blank. The date of the initial report, 3 weeks after Ethan had left the country, the same period when Rachel said she tried calling him, and the secretary claimed he was too busy. But what truly made the floor feel like it was giving way beneath his feet was the handwritten note on the last page, penned in his father's unmistakable handwriting: "Keep Ethan uninformed, avoid scandal. Monitor the situation." And below that, a series of payments with dates, none to Rachel, who had clearly never received a cent from the Carter family, but to keep surveillance on her, to ensure the information never reached Ethan. His father had known. The entire time his father had known. Ethan sank heavily into the worn leather chair, feeling sick. Memories flooded his mind in painful flashes. His father insisting he consult another specialist about his infertility. His father arranging his transfer to the international office. His father intercepting calls and letters during that period. The absolute control Walter Carter had always exerted over everyone around him had extended even to this, the most personal and important decision of Ethan's life. The right to know he was going to be a father. The right to choose to stay, to be there when his daughter was born. With trembling hands, he replaced the documents in the envelope. He picked up his phone and dialed Rachel's number. "I need to see you, it's urgent." 3 hours later, they sat in a discreet cafe, far from the park where they usually met with Emily. Rachel could see something very serious had happened: the pallor of his face, the tension in his shoulders, the redness around his eyes suggesting he might have cried. "What happened?" she asked, genuinely concerned. Without a word, Ethan placed the envelope on the table. Rachel stared at it, confused. Then she opened it and began skimming the documents. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock, then to anger. "Your father investigated me. He knew, Rachel." Ethan's voice shook. "He knew from the very start that you were pregnant, that Emily was my daughter, and he deliberately kept that from me." Rachel kept flipping through the documents, finally reaching the handwritten note, her eyes fixed on those cruel words: "Keep Ethan uninformed." "My God," she whispered. "He robbed me," Ethan said, his voice tight with repressed emotion. "He robbed me of myself, of my chance to be a father, to be there when Emily was born, when she took her first steps, said her first word." Rachel swallowed hard, her own eyes brimming with tears. "We were torn apart, Ethan. All three of us." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding of what had been taken from them. Not just Ethan, but Rachel too, who could have had support, who might not have faced single parenthood alone. And Emily, who had been denied the right to grow up knowing her father. "What do we do now?" Rachel asked at last. Ethan gazed out the cafe window at the rain washing over the city. "We can't get back the time we lost, but we can stop this ghost from haunting us." "Should we tell Emily?" "Not yet. She's too young to understand something like this. But one day, when she's older, she deserves to know." Rachel nodded, reaching her hand across the table to lightly touch Ethan's. A small gesture of solidarity, of shared comprehension. "He took away our past," she said softly, "but he can't take away our future." That night, back in his empty apartment, Ethan didn't feel the usual loneliness. Instead, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The ghost of his father had always been there, controlling, manipulating, deciding what was best. No more. Tomorrow he would see Emily. He would tell her stories, answer her questions, hold her tiny hand when they crossed the street, and each moment would be a small victory against the shadow that had tried to keep them apart. The Carter family mansion had remained empty since Walter Carter's death. Ethan had never wanted to live there, preferring his modern downtown apartment. But that autumn morning, he found himself standing in front of the enormous wrought-iron gate, fallen leaves swirling around his feet. A few yards behind him, Rachel and Emily waited in the car he'd rented. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rachel asked when he came back and opened the car door. "She needs to see this part of our story too," Ethan replied. "For better or worse, this is part of her family's legacy." The three of them walked together along the stone path that cut through the neglected garden. Emily held both their hands, her eyes wide at the imposing structure that emerged before them. A three-story Victorian-style house with tall windows and a wraparound porch. "Who lived here?" she asked, her small voice echoing in the silence. "My father, your grandfather," Ethan answered, feeling a knot in his throat at the words. "Though he never got the chance to meet you." "Was he nice?" Ethan and Rachel exchanged quick glances. "He was complicated," Ethan replied carefully. "Sometimes people make bad choices because they think they're protecting the ones they love." They entered the silent house, where furniture shrouded in white sheets looked like frozen ghosts in time. Emily walked cautiously, as if afraid of waking some sleeping spirit. Her small boots echoed on the polished wooden floor. "Why are we here?" Rachel asked in a low voice, as Emily wandered to a dust-covered piano in the corner. "Because I've made a decision," Ethan replied, watching his daughter run her fingers softly over the keys. "About her future. About ours." In the office that had once belonged to Walter Carter, Ethan pulled back the heavy velvet drapes, letting the golden autumn light flood the room. On the mahogany desk, he placed a leather folder he had brought along. "Emily, sweetie, come here a minute," he called, keeping his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. The girl approached, curious. Looking at the large leather chair Ethan indicated she should sit in. She seemed tiny there, her feet dangling above the floor. "Do you know what this is?" Ethan asked, opening the folder to show her some documents. Emily shook her head. "No, it's a gift, but it's not a toy or a book. It's something that will help you in the future when you're older." Rachel stepped closer, frowning at the sight of the papers. "Ethan, what are these?" "A trust fund in her name. Emily Carter Moore." He locked eyes with Rachel. "You'll be the trustee until she turns 18. After that, the money is hers to use as she pleases. College, travel, starting a business, whatever she decides." Rachel went pale. "I can't accept this." "It's not a gift, Rachel. It's the minimum." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. "It's what she would have had from the start if things had been different." Emily looked back and forth between them, sensing tension but not fully understanding what was happening. "Is it treasure?" she asked innocently. Ethan smiled, kneeling to her level. In a way, yes, it's to make sure you always have what you need. So you can study, grow, and follow your dreams. Rachel still seemed uncomfortable. Can we talk about this later? She murmured, glancing meaningfully at Emily. Ethan nodded, closing the folder. He turned to his daughter. There's one more thing I want to show you. He took them out to the backyard where a large tree stood, solitary and majestic against the autumn sky. This is the tree I drew for you in chalk at the park, remember? An oak, except this one isn't blue. He smiled, pointing to the branches stretching out like welcoming arms. When I was a boy, I used to climb it, even though my father didn't like it. Emily gazed up in wonder at the towering tree. Can we build a treehouse here? Maybe. One day, Ethan looked at Rachel, seeking her approval. If your mom agrees, Rachel observed them both. The resemblance between father and daughter obvious, not just in their features, but in how they tilted their heads to look up, in the gestures they made as they spoke. She felt her heart soften. One day, she agreed gently. In the following weeks, they established a routine. Ethan completely revamped his work schedule, something unthinkable a few months earlier. He delegated meetings, cancelled trips, and reshaped his corporate life to accommodate Emily's. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he picked his daughter up from school. He helped her with homework at the small kitchen table in Rachel's apartment, discovering that second-grade math was more challenging than he'd thought when explained by a 7-year-old. On Saturdays, they spent the day together, sometimes all three of them, sometimes just father and daughter, while Rachel took the chance to rest or catch up on her own work. They went to the zoo, museums, parks, slowly building a shared album of memories. One Saturday morning, while having breakfast at a little neighborhood cafe, Emily looked thoughtfully at Ethan over her hot chocolate. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, princess," he answered, using the nickname that had come naturally to him. "Why is your last name different from mine?" "My teacher said children usually have their father's last name." Ethan felt the weight of that innocent question. He looked at Rachel, who was just returning from the counter with fresh coffee. "It's a fair question," Rachel said, sitting down, "and there's a simple answer. When you were born, your dad wasn't here. That's why you got my last name, Moore." Emily seemed to ponder this seriously. "But now he is here." "Yes, now I am," Ethan affirmed, feeling a rush of emotion in his chest. "So can I have his last name too?" The adults exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed this yet, though Ethan had thought about it many times in recent weeks. "Emily Carter Moore sounds really nice," Rachel finally said, surprising Ethan with her openness. "We can talk about it." The smile that lit up the girl's face was worth more than all the contracts Ethan had ever signed. Parent-teacher conferences at Emily's school had always been Rachel's responsibility. Sitting across from the teacher, hearing about her daughter's progress, her struggles, her talents, that had always been hers alone. But now, as they waited in the hallway decorated with children's art, she wasn't alone. Ethan was beside her, nervously flipping through an educational magazine, constantly checking his watch as if expecting a sudden work emergency. "Relax," she whispered, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "It's just to talk about how she's doing in class. What if the teacher says she's having problems? What if it's my fault for turning her life upside down?" The anxiety was so evident on his face that Rachel couldn't help but smile. "Now you understand what it really means to love," she observed. "That's it. That constant fear of messing everything up, of not being good enough." Ethan looked at her with surprise, as though she'd just revealed a deep universal secret. The classroom door opened, and Miss Bennet invited them in with a warm smile. "Miss Moore, and you must be Emily's father." "Ethan Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Emily has been talking about you a lot," the teacher commented, indicating the chairs in front of her desk. "She's very happy to have her father around now." Rachel watched quietly as the teacher showed them Emily's recent work, her progress in math, her special knack for science. Ethan asked questions, took notes, absorbing every detail as though it were instructions for the most important mission of his life. "There's one thing I'd like to show you," Ms. Bennet said, getting up. "If you could follow me to the school's garden for a moment." They walked through the colorful hallways to an inner courtyard where small trees had been recently planted, each with a little sign bearing the name of the student responsible for the planting. It was a special environmental project, the teacher explained. Each child planted a tree and made their own identifying sign. Emily was particularly enthusiastic. They stopped in front of a small oak sapling. The brightly painted wooden sign simply read, "Emily Carter, father and daughter." Rachel felt Ethan's hand reach for hers, squeezing it tightly. When she looked at him, she saw unshed tears shining in his eyes. Saturday night had fallen by the time Ethan finally arrived home after a long day. He'd taken Emily to the movies, then dropped her off at Rachel's apartment. Now, alone in his luxurious penthouse, he felt the contrast between the life he'd built and the life he had discovered. On his coffee table lay the legal documents he had discussed with his legal team, changing Emily's name to include Carter, designating her as his legal heir, drafting a new will, ensuring that, whatever happened to him, she would be protected. Next to them was a drawing Emily had made that week, 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun. "Mommy, me and Daddy," it said in bright, uneven letters. His phone rang. It was Rachel. "She's asleep," she informed him gently. "She asked me to thank you for the movie and the giant hot dog." "I'm the one who should thank her," Ethan replied. "For everything." A brief silence followed. It wasn't uncomfortable, but filled with things unsaid, with possibilities, with a future slowly taking shape. "You know what she asked me before bed," Rachel finally said. "Whether someday the 3 of us could live in the same house, like the families in her movies." Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. "And what did you say?" "That real life is more complicated than the movies." A pause. "But that sometimes miracles do happen." After hanging up, Ethan walked out to the balcony of his penthouse. The city lights below sparkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in that sea of buildings was the small apartment where his daughter slept, where the woman he once loved, and perhaps never really stopped loving, lived her simple, dignified life. He thought of his father, of the manipulation, of the obsessive control. He thought of the lost years, of the memories he would never have. But he also thought of the possibilities ahead, birthdays, graduations, maybe weddings, an entire lifetime of moments yet to come. The small oak sapling in the school garden would grow slowly. It would be years before it became a real tree with deep roots and strong branches. Much like the relationship they were building, day by day, brick by brick. "Emily Carter," he whispered to the night. A name, a promise, a future. The idea came during a Friday dinner. Emily was excitedly talking about career day at school when parents were invited to talk about their jobs. "What is it you do again, Daddy?" she asked, stuffing a forkful of pasta into her mouth. Ethan realized that, despite months of seeing each other, he'd never really explained his work to his daughter. How did you describe the complex world of mergers and acquisitions, investments and negotiations to a 7-year-old? "I run a company," he said simply. "What kind of company?" Emily pressed, curiosity shining in her eyes. Ethan looked at Rachel, who only shrugged, amused by his discomfort. "A company that builds buildings and buys other companies," he tried to explain. "Can I see it?" The direct question, no beating around the bush. "See it?" "Your company, where you work. It must be huge." Ethan smiled. "It's pretty big, yes. So can I go there?" Emily insisted, with the persistence typical of children. "I think she wants to see your world, Ethan," Rachel said gently. "It makes sense." So that was how, the following Saturday, Ethan ended up giving Emily a tour of the quiet halls of the skyscraper that housed Carter Group's headquarters. The building, usually bustling on weekdays, was nearly deserted, with only a few security guards and skeleton staff present. "Wow!" Emily exclaimed upon entering the main lobby, her little face tilted up, taking in the huge glass ceiling reaching several floors above. "It's like a glass castle," Ethan laughed, seeing his corporate empire through his daughter's eyes. Suddenly, the severe architectural lines and minimalist elegance he prized so much seemed cold and impersonal. "Is this the kind of building your company builds?" Emily asked, holding his hand firmly as they walked across the marble floor. "Some of them, Yes, Ethan explained, pointing out the window to other skyscrapers in the city skyline. That one with the rounded top, and that other with gardens on the balconies. Emily's eyes went wide. You made all those buildings? Not by myself, he smiled. I have a lot of people working with me. In the panoramic elevator that rose smoothly to the top floor, Emily pressed her face to the glass, watching the city shrink below. It's like flying, she whispered, enchanted. Ethan watched her, marveling at her ability to find wonder in things he had long taken for granted. When was the last time he'd appreciated the view from this elevator? When had he last realized how privileged he was to work above the city skyline? This is my office, he said as the doors opened directly onto the executive penthouse floor. The entire floor was dominated by his suite, a secretary's desk and a few meeting rooms. Huge windows provided a 360-degree view of the city, a clear blue sky stretching infinitely beyond the skyscrapers. It's so big, Emily exclaimed, running to the window. Look, Mommy would think we were tiny ants if she looked up here. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. Rachel had never been here. She had never known this part of his life. Their worlds had been as separate as sky and earth. Emily explored every corner of the office, the huge meeting table where multi-million-dollar deals were signed, the rare wood desk where Ethan spent most of his day, the small executive kitchen with Italian-imported coffee machines. Do you have a fridge just for you? She asked, impressed, opening the built-in cooler. Yes. Suddenly it felt absurdly extravagant. Our whole home could fit in here, she noted, not in judgment, but as a statement of fact. Home. The word echoed in Ethan's mind. Rachel's small apartment was home to Emily. This massive, luxurious place was merely an office. Would you like to see where I live? He asked impulsively. The girl's eyes gleamed. Really? 20 minutes later, they were stepping into Ethan's penthouse, a duplex occupying the top 2 floors of an exclusive residential building in the heart of the city. Emily was momentarily speechless. Rare for her. It was impressive even for adults. Double-height ceilings in the main living area, glass walls overlooking the city park, a floating staircase leading to the second level, and custom furniture from famous designers. You live here, by yourself? She finally asked, her small voice echoing in the large space. Yes, Ethan replied, suddenly aware of how empty it was. No children's drawings stuck to the fridge, no tiny shoes scattered by the door, no laughter echoing down the corridors. Emily walked slowly through the apartment, carefully touching the furniture, as if it might break at her slightest touch. She paused in front of a wall where Ethan kept some framed photos, mostly corporate ceremonies, a few with politicians and celebrities. No personal photos, no family. Until recently, when he had added a new one, he and Emily at the zoo, both smiling for the camera, her ice cream melting in her hands. The only truly personal picture in the entire apartment. That's my favorite picture, Emily said, pointing exactly at that one. Mine too, Ethan replied, his voice slightly hoarse. He showed her around. The professional-grade kitchen he seldom used, preferring takeout. The home office that was almost an extension of his corporate one, and the master bedroom with its panoramic view. What's in this room? Emily asked, stopping in front of a closed door. It's... Ethan hesitated. It was just a guest room, never used. Actually, I was thinking it could be your room for when you want to stay over, if your mom is okay with that. Emily looked at him, surprised. My room? Here? Yes, this is your home too, Emily. You can come whenever you want. She opened the door slowly. It was a large, impersonal space, decorated in neutral tones like the rest of the apartment. Can we paint it purple? She asked, a hopeful smile on her face, and put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Ethan smiled, picturing his decorator's horror at the thought of purple walls in the pristine apartment. Of course, we can decorate it however you like. Emily ran to the window, gazing at the city below. It feels like being a bird, she remarked in awe. Then she turned to him with a serious expression. But I think you must feel really lonely up here, Daddy. The simple, direct observation hit Ethan like a punch in the gut. Yes, he did feel lonely. He always had. even when he hadn't known how to name that feeling. Sometimes, he admitted. But now I have you, Emily smiled, running over to hug him. And Mommy too, she said with childlike certainty. She can come too, right? Ethan felt his heart speed up. If she wants to. Of course. Back at the office, as they prepared to leave, Emily had one last request. Can I sit in your chair, just for a little bit? Ethan lifted her up into the huge leather executive chair. Emily spun around, laughing, pretending to sign important papers on the empty desk. When I grow up, she declared with sudden seriousness, I'm going to work with you, but I'll also be an astronaut on weekends. Ethan smiled, imagining a future that, for the first time, wasn't solely about acquisitions and profits, but infinitely more meaningful possibilities. It would be an honor to work with you, Miss Carter, he said formally, offering a small bow that made her giggle. As they left the building, Emily glanced back one last time. It's pretty here, Daddy, but I like the park where we draw better. Ethan smiled, gently squeezing her small hand in his. Me too, Princess. Me too. The street fair took place every Sunday in the city's old district. Brightly colored stalls stretched for several blocks, selling everything from fresh fruit to crafts, from local snacks to used books. It was a little ritual Rachel and Emily had kept up even during the toughest times. Now, for the first time, Ethan joined them. They strolled leisurely among the stalls, the three of them together with no specific plan. Emily ran ahead a few steps, stopping here and there to investigate a shiny rock, a handmade toy, a tempting sweet. Ethan and Rachel followed, side by side, in a comfortable silence that required no filler. Mommy, Daddy, look at this, Emily shouted excitedly, stopping in front of a used bookstall. Ethan still felt a little surge in his chest whenever she called him Daddy. The word never lost its power, its ability to transform something within him. They approached the stall where Emily was already flipping through an illustrated book. The cover showed a dark-haired girl and an older man in a brightly colored hot air balloon, floating over a field of sunflowers. It's us, Emily exclaimed, pointing to the figures. Look, Daddy, she has hair like mine, and the man looks like you. Ethan took the book, examining it with curiosity. You're right, there's a certain resemblance. Can we buy it? Please. Her eyes, his eyes, sparkled with hope. Rachel was already reaching into her purse for change. Of course you can, honey. Let me pay for it, Ethan offered, pulling out his wallet. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a small smile. A year ago she would have refused. 6 months ago she would have told him she didn't need it. Now she simply accepted it, not as charity but as partnership. They continued through the fair, buying caramel apples, watching a street performer juggle, listening to an old violinist play. Ethan realized, not surprisingly, that he preferred these simple moments over any business dinner at a 5-star restaurant. Late in the afternoon, they arrived at Rachel's small apartment. Without any formal agreement or invitation, Ethan simply walked in with them, as if it were natural, as if he belonged in this routine. Emily ran to the sofa, already opening the new book. Can we read it together? Ethan looked at Rachel, and who nodded, heading to the kitchen to make hot chocolate. He sat beside his daughter, settling her against his arm. The Girl with the Blue Balloon, he read the title aloud. Rachel returned with 3 steaming mugs, sitting in the armchair across from them. Ethan began to read, his deep voice filling the small room. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Lena who lived with her mother in a house by the sea. Every morning, Lena climbed onto the roof and looked out toward the horizon, hoping to see a blue balloon in the sky. As the story went on, Lena discovered that her father, a balloon adventurer, hadn't abandoned the family as everyone said, but had gotten lost during a fierce storm. For years, Lena had held on to hope, watching the sky, until one day he finally returned. It was once thought that the girl's father was lost, but he was only finding his way back. When he closed the book, he noticed Emily had fallen asleep against his chest, her breathing deep and steady. Rachel was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. No longer distrust, maybe just peace? Carefully, so as not to wake Emily, he shifted her so she could sleep more comfortably on the sofa. covering her with the colorful throw folded on the armrest of the chair. "We're doing okay, right?" he whispered to Rachel, the question carrying more weight than the simple words suggested. She held his gaze for a long moment before answering, "We're doing it together." The months passed like pages turning in a beloved book, each one both familiar and new. The seasons changed. Autumn gave way to winter, which slowly yielded to spring. And with each month, week, and day, what had been the exception became the rule. Ethan's visits were no longer special occasions, but part of the daily routine. Weekends at Rachel's or his place required no elaborate planning or negotiation. The silences that were once cautious now resonated with laughter. Ethan started appearing in the school notes Emily brought home. "Daddy will pick me up today," written in her childish scrawl. His name appeared in the drawings on the fridge, in bedtime stories, in conversations with her friends. One ordinary day in May, Emily came home from school holding an art project, a family portrait made of colored pasta and glue. 3 smiling figures, side by side. "The teacher asked who we were," she explained, showing off her noodle masterpiece. "I told her it was Mommy, me, and Daddy. Joanne Williams said it was weird because you don't live together. But I told him families don't have to share the same house." Rachel and Ethan exchanged a look over the girl's head, a moment of silent understanding, admiration for the simple wisdom she already had. That night, after Emily was asleep, they spoke quietly about the future, about arrangements and possibilities. It wasn't the first such conversation, but something had changed. There was a solidity between them now, a trust that hadn't been there before. On a sunny June Sunday, Rachel called Ethan earlier than usual. "I have a surprise. Can you and Emily meet me at the address I'm about to text you? Bring something for a picnic if you like." Ethan and Emily arrived at the location shortly after noon. It was a quiet street in a modest but well-kept residential neighborhood. Tall trees lined the sidewalk, creating welcome shade. Rachel stood in front of a small yellow house with a wooden porch. A little garden in front showed fresh soil and newly planted daisies along a stone walkway. "What do you think?" she asked as they approached, a nervous smile playing on her lips. Emily frowned at the house, then at her mother. "It's pretty. Whose is it?" Rachel took a deep breath before answering. "It's ours." Ethan stared at her in surprise. "Hayasi bought a house." "I'm renting it for now," Rachel admitted, pulling a key from her pocket. "Want to look inside?" The house was small but welcoming, a living room open to a compact kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The rooms were practically empty, with just a few boxes stacked in the corners. What stood out most was the light streaming in from large windows, creating golden pools on the hardwood floor. And then there was the backyard, not large, but with a sturdy tree in the center, perfect for a future treehouse, and enough space for a small garden. Emily immediately raced around the empty space, her footsteps echoing against the bare walls. Isadora, the doll she never left behind, was clutched in her arms as she explored every corner. "Is this really our house now?" she asked, returning to where the adults stood. Rachel knelt so they were eye to eye. "Yes, honey, our family's house." The word family hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and perfect. Emily grabbed it without hesitation, accepting it in that straightforward way children do, without questioning the complications adults see. "I'll show Isadora everything," she announced, running off to start another round of exploring. Once they were alone, Ethan looked at Rachel with equal parts admiration and confusion. "You didn't tell me you were looking for a house." "I wanted to be sure first, see if I could afford it." She paused, "and I wanted it to be a surprise." "It certainly is a surprise." He looked around, trying to process what this meant. "Do you need help moving in?" Rachel smiled, grateful for his practical response instead of the more complicated questions both of them knew were in the air. "That would be great. I don't have much, but it's still nice to have help with the furniture." In the hours that followed, they worked together. Ethan brought over the few pieces of furniture Rachel had from her apartment. Emily helped arrange her books and toys in what would be her bedroom. They ordered pizza when they got hungry, eating on the floor of the empty living room and laughing at the stories Emily made up about neighbors they hadn't yet met. As dusk painted the sky pink and orange, Rachel started unpacking some personal items. From a carefully wrapped box, she removed a simple picture frame. Ethan recognized the photo immediately. Him, Rachel, and Emily at a picnic in the park a few weeks earlier. It wasn't a posed or planned shot. Someone, perhaps an elderly lady passing by, had offered to take their picture when she saw them laughing together. In the photo, Emily stood between them, an arm around each, all three looking relaxed and genuine. Rachel placed the frame on the built-in shelf in the living room, the first decorative object in the new house, setting the tone for everything to come. "I never thought I'd fit into something that felt like a home again," Ethan said quietly, looking at the photo. Rachel turned to him, her eyes soft in the twilight. "You didn't fit. You helped build it." That night, after Emily was settled on a temporary mattress in her new bedroom, Ethan and Rachel sat on the front porch, sharing a cheap bottle of wine in paper cups, the only ones available at the moment. "So, what does this mean for us?" Ethan finally voiced the question that had hovered over them all day. Rachel glanced up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "It means we're trying, one day at a time." "Where do I fit into this house?" "Wherever you want to fit, Ethan," she turned to him. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just opening a door." Before they could continue, a small sound caught their attention. Emily stood in the hallway, a crayon in her hand, drawing on the freshly painted wall. "Emily, what are you doing?" Rachel exclaimed, leaping to her feet. But as they got closer, they realized it wasn't just random scribbles. It was a careful drawing, a simple house with 3 windows, and inside each window a smiling face. Underneath the drawing, in large, uneven letters, Emily had written, "Mommy, Daddy, me." "Sorry, Mommy," she said, though she didn't sound particularly sorry. "The house needed us in it." Rachel looked at the drawing, then at Ethan, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. "It's okay," Rachel said gently. "Actually, I think it's perfect." That night, once they finally coaxed Emily to bed, Ethan stayed longer than he'd planned. He helped Rachel organize a few more boxes, assembled a shelf, discussed ideas for the backyard. When he finally got ready to leave, standing at the door of the 3-window house, he realized a part of him was still there. "I'll come back tomorrow to help with the rest," he offered. "I know you will," Rachel replied with a serene smile. Driving back to his spacious, empty apartment, Ethan thought of the little yellow house, the crayon drawings on the wall, the 3 windows with 3 smiling faces. He thought about all the choices that had brought him here, some his, some made by others, some simply luck or fate. He thought about the wound he'd carried for so long, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with him, something broken. The doctors had only confirmed with their diagnoses. And he realized that wound had finally found not just a bandage, but a real home. A place where it could heal, not in spite of its imperfections, but through them, because it was precisely those imperfections that had led him here, to them, to himself. In the house with 3 windows and a perfectly imperfect family, the story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.